Welcome to Exploring Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay. My name is Mathilde Rand, your host. We are at 90.7, 89.7, and 89.5 FM. My guest is Linda Wilshusen. Linda moved from Los Angeles to Santa Cruz to attend UCSC the third year it was open. She is a former executive director of the Santa Cruz County Regional Transportation Commission and has loved living in Santa Cruz County and specifically in Live Oak for 37 years. She wrote an article for the 2018 History Journal of the MA called Between the Gulches, and we'll talk about that. But first, welcome, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Could you tell us a little bit how you developed your interest in the history of Live Oak?
First, I'm going to tell you the full name of the article, and it's in the Museum of Art and History Journal number 9. It was published in 2018, and it's called Between the Gulches, The Twin Fates of Live Oak Cityhood and the Broadway-Bromer Road. So I focused on that in my article. There's so many things about Live Oak history that I know I'm interested in, people are interested in, but I was looking at the kind of the area of the mid-20th century and the migration that was happening then and how geography has affected the fact that Live Oak is an unincorporated area. We're not a part of either the city of Santa Cruz or Capitola, and that's had different consequences over the years. And I wanted to know the answer to the question about why Live Oak was never annexed to Santa Cruz or Capitola.
Right. But you started in the beginning with the Live Oak neighbors. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We moved here in 1988, and I was busy working, and then there was a Wendy's restaurant, fast food restaurant, proposed for 17th and Bromer, and, a lot of people in the neighborhood, and that's the neighborhood I live in, is kind of central Live Oak, didn't like the idea of that sort of thing in our neighborhood, and I don't normally approve of neighborhood opposition to things, especially housing, but I know what the factors are to make it happen. And the fact was, in this case, it was not consistent with the zoning. So people got together around that and wanted to keep getting together and learn more about local government in our area and fire districts and water. And
then all of a sudden, you came up with, or somebody came up with, historical walks.
Well, we had meetings for like 5 years for every month, and then we were kind of running out of topics, and that's exactly what happened. Some of us got interested in history, in particular Norman Poitevin, who was on our steering committee, and he had the time and the ability to do some of the research, and he started producing these walking tour brochures and led walks, and we had like 35 to 125 people on these walks in various neighborhoods around Live Oak for 13 years. Really only stopped because of COVID. And then he's getting quite elderly now.
Give us an example of a walk.
And we have about 18 of them all together, so I'm not going to list them all. It's like historic Twin Lakes, Cliffside and the poultry industry, flowers along East Cliff, the railroad, the ladies of Old Holy Cross Cemetery. And these brochures are all available at the Live Oak Library. They've been there for a number of years, so you may have seen them there. And they're also available at the new library Annexed, which is at the Simpkins Family Swim Center.
Right. I went on once on a walk, and we went along the railroad tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was a very popular walk.
I know. And
Swan Lake is the other very popular one.
Okay. And so tell us a little bit what we see on that walk. He stopped at every little tree almost, and then he had all these interesting aspects.
Well, Norman's a fabulous storyteller, and really, I certainly can't compete with him, but I actually walk that part of the rail line quite often, and one of the interesting factors about the rail line is, in addition to the ocean, of course, and the coast, and then the gulches, which is, again, in the title of my article, which are Arana Gulch, which used to empty into Woods Lagoon, one of the Twin Lakes. Now Woods Lagoon is the harbor, became the harbor in 1960. The other Twin Lake is Swan Lake. And so that also drains into Swan Lake and then out to the ocean, but also provides a barrier kind of for development. And then you have Rodeo Gulch. So these things, the railroad, the ocean and the gulches really determine how development happened in our community. It's why there aren't that many through roads in our community. It's all kind of divided up. So access has been a key thing. And then, of course, access both within our community and also access to Live Oak, between Santa Cruz and Live Oak, and also to Capitola.
Right. And so going back a little bit more to Norman, he is writing a book at this moment, right?
He has written a book, and the book compiles all the walks. All the walk brochures are in the book, so that's about half the book. And then the rest of the book are other stories about other different parts of Live Oak, like the Antonelli Gardens, like the old drive-in that was called the Skyview, and now it's the flea market. And then before that, it was called Encina, which was the Encina Drive-In, which was actually one of the names that was considered for Live Oak when it was considering annexation, because we couldn't use Live Oak because there's already a city called Live Oak in the Sierra foothills in California. So that's a part of the annexation story.
Wow. So his book coming out, right?
We're going to be publishing his book, this summer, and we have a listserv that is called Live Oak Announcements at googlegroups.com, and that's where I talk about history things that are coming up. If people get that, they know I announced the exhibit that's at Simpkins right now, done by Bill Simpkins, around Live Oak history. I talk a lot about the Murray Street Bridge and what's been happening there and other things that happen in our community. So if people are interested in signing up, you can go to that site, or I can give my email address at the end of the program.
Right. And so tell us again the Google group.
Live Oak Announcements, one word, at googlegroups.com.
Perfect. I get them. And
Great.
That's how I know what's happening with the Murray Bridge. Because you keep us posted.
I'm sure I'm a thorn in their side. Although it's working a little better than I thought it would, I have to say.
Yeah, and that's why I know that from where I live in Live Oak, I cannot go to the west side. But if I come from the west side, I can still go over the Murray Bridge. But I haven't done it yet because I just feel like I want him to do the work as quickly as possible and get it all done before, 2028?
It'll be at least 4 years.
At least 4 years?
Yeah,
Okay.
and we're in 2025, so.
So you talked about Simpkins. There's the library as well as the exhibits there. And we talked about Norman Poitevin. So I call him our Live Oak historian, and that's how a lot of people know him, because we had lots of people participating in the walks, and he's unable to do them anymore. So at this point, the brochures were set up as to be a self-guided tour, and that's what we're making available to people. Let's talk about, because Live Oak is pretty well known for having been farmland for the longest time. So can you tell us a little bit about the farms and how that came about?
I think of it as there being two major migrations to California. The first one being the gold rush that brought a lot of people from the other parts of the U.S. to California. And we weren't even a state at that point. That was in the 1850s. At that point, there were cattle, and the people who came, they were farmers, a lot of them, and they farmed wheat and probably had some chickens and some cows, and there were some bulb ranchers who started here using bulbs that were actually developed over in Europe, over in the Netherlands. Some of the images of Live Oak history show the calla lilies, and something that's pretty familiar to people around here, and that also is in the exhibit that's at Simpkins right now. And then the second wave is when the automobiles started being mass produced, and that was in 1915, early 20s, and that's when there was an enterprising group of business people here in Santa Cruz County. The name of their business was Wilson Brothers, and they subdivided Live Oak into 6 different subdivisions of 1 to 2 acres, and they were basically poultry residences. They offered, and they had built in these subdivisions, a house, a barn, poultry barn, and then you had room also for your family garden or if you wanted to grow some vegetables. So that really determined how Live Oak developed. If you live here in Live Oak, you know that there's still some of those parcels around, like Harper Street is a kind of one of our streets that looks kind of more like it used to look. It's not fully developed yet, but it's one reason reason why there's a lot of developing behind houses, the driveway, and then the 2 or 3 houses in the back, that's what you could fit on an acre or 2 acres. Because you have to have room for the driveway, too, which takes up a lot of room, but we like our cars. Those subdivisions, together with the constraints on access I already mentioned, the railroad, the gulches, again, determined us as kind of a separate community, but we didn't have a downtown. We didn't have a civic center like Santa Cruz has. So it led to a little bit different sort of governance here.
I saw in your article Between the Gulches something about the Genoa farmers on 7th and Bromer.
Majolo. Yeah. Emilio and Rose Majolo. I was so excited to discover these people. Even local historians who are very well known didn't really know about these people. And he was president of the school board for a long time. And actually, Live Oak is named after the school district. So that's where we first got our identity, was the school district. Before that, the kids had to go either ride their horses out to Soquel. Usually that's what they did because they couldn't really get into Santa Cruz. Getting to Santa Cruz was not very accessible back when we had horses and carts and that sort of thing. It became a little bit more accessible with automobiles, but you had to either go over these bridges that weren't able to be very well maintained, or you had to go down in the gulch and up out of the gulch. And it was a real benefit to the community to have a school district here, which is about 150 years old now.
And so the Majolos, they were Live Oak farmers. He was president of the Live Oak Improvement Association, and he was on the school board. But he also was a farmer.
He provided a lot of the vegetables for Dominican Hospital, all the schools in Santa Cruz. His in-laws, his wife's family, whose name was Saraceto, actually established the first farmers market in downtown Santa Cruz. So Live Oak has always been very linked with Santa Cruz.
And so at some point, when farming wasn't as profitable anymore?
Part of the reason it wasn't profitable is because we had water service from Santa Cruz, which started when Santa Cruz purchased the Belts wells, which they're kind of along the Rodale Gulch water flow area. And when the city purchased that, that's where we had gotten water before that. We started all getting city water here in Live Oak. And to make it work for the city and for people in Live Oak, they added a surcharge onto it, or a tax onto it, which in the beginning wasn't that much. It was like 10%, and it improved the reliability of the water. It kind of made sense. But over the years, that tax had gotten up to 100%. So we were paying double for our water. People in the city of Santa Cruz were paying. So it made it very hard on the farmers that were using city water. So they built the Sorrento Oaks mobile home community on Bromer Street, which is right around the corner from the property they had at 7th and Bromer. And that was the first resident-owned mobile home community
and that happened
in Live Oak.
1995, I believe. Quite a number of years. They ran the mobile home park, and then at some point the residents wanted to buy it, and they did. And as far as I know, they were very congenial and helped out quite a bit. And Sorrento Oaks is still a senior community and thriving.
I live right around the corner, and I know people in that community, and if I ever have to move, I think I'd like to move there.
So anyway, I want to tell the listeners that they're listening to Exploring Monterey Bay, and in particular we're talking about Live Oak history, and some of the people that Linda knows very well and has written about, and we'll talk about her article in just a moment. We just talked about her interest in Live Oak. She's lived here since 1988. They started the Live Oak Neighbors based on the Wendy's that was going to move in and really didn't fit in the fabric of the community. And then Norman Pointevin started historical walks, and they're available at the library, the Live Oak Library, and a book is coming out. So we already talked about a lot of things, but let's continue. When did you start collecting the information which led eventually to writing the article in Landscape, the history journal of the Ma?
So before I worked at the RTC, I was a researcher for the California State Attorney General's office around a suit that was filed against the state for the Wilder Ranch development that never happened and eventually turned into a state park. And it's because of that work that then I was asked to work for the city attorney to look into why the Broadway-Bromer Road was never built, because they had been sued by the Kinsley family that owned property on Arana Gulch. So they felt like their property had been inappropriately taken from them. They couldn't develop it because that road never went through. Then I worked at the Regional Transportation Commission. I have an interest in transportation and geography and roads and rail and all that sort of thing. So after I retired, I kind of circled back around to looking into that, partly because Martine Bernal, who was the city manager at that time, interviewed me when I was interested in being on the Water Commission, which I ended up being on for 8 years, representing Live Oak. I was the non-city representative on the City Water Commission. He wondered why Live Oak had never been annexed, and I started thinking, I know a little bit about this. And then the idea came up to do a journal. A journal's title is Landscapes, Activism that Shaped Santa Cruz County. And my friend Elizabeth Schilling is the editor of that journal, and just seemed to fit well in the group of articles that's in there. It's a fabulous journal. It's available via the Museum of Art and History.
And it covers the period from 1955 to 2005.
Recent history. Yeah. It's not back. And
the article came out in 2018. Tell us a little bit about the reasons why Live Oak never was annexed.
My thesis is that it has a lot to do with the geography, with the gulches that we have and with the ocean. And then in the late 1950s, the freeway was built, and that kind of cut Live Oak in half, which was another factor. And the fact that it was hard to get here. It was hard to move around within Live Oak, and we didn't have any central community because we identified with primarily Santa Cruz, a little bit with Capitola and Soquel, but not so much once the freeway went in, honestly. Like anything, there are other factors. It's not just one thing. The university and the timing of the decision about the university is another factor. That was around the early 60s when the state decided to put a new university in the Bay Area, and they decided on Santa Cruz over the Almaden Valley because we had much better weather, honestly. That was one of the reasons. You can read about that in the journal, too, in Frank Zwart's article, who's an architect at UCSC. So that was a factor, and that decision was made right at the same time that the city had just done a municipal plan, and they had an intention to annex Live Oak. And they were about to start the process of that, and I think people in Live Oak were probably feeling like that was probably a good thing to do. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm kind of guessing that. And then the university decision was made by the state, and the whole emphasis of the city shifted toward the Cal Ranch, which is where the university was built, and the west side of Santa Cruz. Just a timing thing, partly. Another factor is the water rates I mentioned. That made people in Live Oak feel kind of upset about their relationship with the city. And then the access, I already mentioned. The plan for the Broadway-Bromer Road started in the mid-'60s. They built the Laurel Street Bridge was a part of that project. The widening of Broadway, if people have been over in that part of the east side of Santa Cruz, Broadway's like wide enough for 4 lanes. That was the plan, that you were going to continue that 4-lane road across Arana Gulch and then connecting it to Bromer and Live Oak. And actually the access road to the Upper Harbor that goes off 7th, our neighborhood, at 7th and Bromer, where we talked about the Majolos, that access road down into the harbor was the east side of the road that was going to be built. Part of the article is a story about why the road never got built. And we all know that now Arana Gulch is a city park.
Right. You mentioned that there was an annexation fever in 1963, and Capitola was also involved.
So at one point, we kind of had a choice here. That both Santa Cruz and Live Oak were kind of saying, hey, this is what we have to offer, and Capitola, this is what we have to offer. At that point, which was around the late 60s, early 70s, there were people in Live Oak who said, well, we could be our own city. And there was talk starting to happen about a Capitola Mall at 41st Avenue. Partly it's because when they built the freeway, it was about a decade earlier, 1959, early 60s is when the freeway was done in that segment of the Highway 1 freeway. They put in a new Cloverleaf interchange, and we'd never had anything like that before. It was actually the Owl family, who we know from all the developments around Santa Cruz County and also their philanthropy, that built the first regional shopping center on 41st Avenue. It wasn't the Capitola Mall, but it was at Capitola Road and 41st Avenue. And that really freaked out the city of Santa Cruz. And so they started thinking, well, maybe we should annex to 41st Avenue, because they don't always thought they were just going to annex to Rodeo Gulch. People used the waterways as their demarcations of their boundaries, just like Arana Gulch was and still is the demarcation of Santa Cruz. But Capitola also got interested in 41st Avenue for the same reason. And
so the plot thickened. So, and then LAFCO got involved and they imposed a 6-month moratorium. And then in 1971, finally, the moratorium was lifted.
So LAFCO is the Local Agency Formation Commission, which is a very obscure name, but it means they had to approve all annexations from any city or county or district. So that entity is still alive and well.
Yeah. So listeners, read the article. It is absolutely fascinating. And I want to go to one other aspect, and that is the redevelopment agency, because they did quite well in Live Oak. Is that correct?
So redevelopment agencies were allowed in the state roughly between the mid-90s to, it was like 2012, I think. In our county, in Live Oak, it was the purpose of redevelopment in California was really realized because Live Oak had developed it as a rural farming area, and yet then when it urbanized, because it was just a part of the county, there was no requirement for sidewalks or sewer systems or that sort of thing. So it really improved all of that for our community. The library was built here then. The animal shelter was built here then. We got the sidewalks and signals where we needed them. And for me, I'm a walker. Norman's a walker, too. That's
right.
How we came up with the idea of the history walks, honestly. When I moved here, we didn't have any sidewalks on Bromer Street or 7th Avenue. And I remember it was a little scary for my kids to walk to school with no sidewalks.
Yeah, Live Oak is very safe.
It is safe.
Yeah.
I feel very safe here.
And of course, we talked a little bit about the museum. We now have an annex and a regular Live Oak library that has exhibits. And Simpkins has been involved. The Ma has been involved. Tell us a little bit about the surf exhibits in the Live Oak area.
The Museum of Art and History in Santa Cruz is opening their Princes of Surf #2 exhibit next month. And we've worked with them, and that's part of what I do with the history stuff is kind of facilitate things, and with the Google groups also. They will be having an associated history exhibit at Simpkins Family Swim Center and the library annex there about Live Oak and Pleasure Point and Eastside surfing. We use all those names. And this is really so many famous surfers and surfboard makers are from Live Oak, so it'll be a fun exhibit.
Well, I hope, listeners, that we whet your appetite. And if you want to make sure that you stay up to date, go to the Live Oak announcements at googlegroups.com. Or you can email Linda at
liveoaklinda, all one word, @gmail.com.
liveoaklinda@gmail.com. So go out and do your own research, enjoy, and maybe we'll see you in one of those places or see you walking around with the book and doing the Live Oak.
Thank you.
Box. So much gratitude for you coming here. I know there's so much more to talk about, but we have given people some idea of where to go.
Great. Thank you so much.
See you in a couple of weeks.